As a kid, you're raised with a father figure or a mom figure, like in a family. That family system for a kid is like the only place that you feel safe and you feel that you can trust. But then you're being abused as a kid, but you really don't have the knowledge, the language of like calling what is happening to you. When you're an adult, you start reading, you kind of like start feeling that, oh my God, I felt like the most unsafe, unwanted in my own country, in my own home.
Welcome to Orbital Media, a place to learn about human perspective, culture, and society one conversation at a time. If you aren't subscribed yet, make sure to click the button below so you can continue to learn about people of the world, as well as better understand the importance of human culture, history, art, and meaning. Iran is a country with a long and storied history. Though it has been a center of culture, learning, and art for millennia, ever since 1979, with the establishment of a radical Islamic government, Iran has been under the control of a theocracy. Nonetheless, despite strict religious codes, millions of Iranian people, both abroad and within Iran, continue to live their lives in a way so as to keep their historic culture alive. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the differences between most Iranian people and the government, at least as seen through the eyes of one Iranian woman who has agreed to share her perspective. So today, I'm joined by Saba. Saba, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm excited.
So Saba, let's start with the basics. So you're an Iranian woman. You were born there, you spent much of your life there, and now you currently live in the United States.
Mhm.
I'd love to hear just a basic opening about sort of your life, who you are, where you come from, and where you kind of are now in your life before we get into specifics about your perspective on the Iranian people and what it means to be Iranian as distinct from the government.
Mhm. Yeah, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Iran, in an environment that was kind of open to self-discovery per se. Like my family, and the way that they wanted or let us that freedom to be able to discover ourselves, was always very inspiring. And also, we traveled a lot. So before I moved to the United States, I was lucky that I could travel and get to know other cultures and have that kind of open perspective before moving to another country. But yeah, after I finished my undergraduate, got my bachelor's degree in graphic design, I wanted to pursue master's. So the intention behind my immigration was solely education, but I wanted a better life. And the way that I got exposed to that idea of a better life was actually through the lens of traveling a lot as a kid with my family. And just from a very early ages, I would say like around 9 or 10 years old, I kind of like started seeing, oh, there are like other ways of living, especially women, in other countries. My first trip outside of Iran was to Turkey, and I remember as a 9 years old in the airport, I was just looking at all the women without the scarf and how like they were so different from each other, and you could like see their personality, like how they could like express themselves just through that freedom of being able to show more. So yeah, from that early age, I think I got curious about that there is a better, not necessarily, like I thought it was going to be a better life, but now with like the perspective after 15 years of living in the United States, I feel like it just that freedom of choice was something that for me was also in the back of my head when I started applying for different universities. And back then I was applying for schools in Europe, in the US, in Canada, England, and I just wanted to do it. So yeah, I moved when I was around 21, got my master's degree in multiple different disciplines, and worked as a graphic designer. Had a little bit of career switch to a personal trainer, which that opened a new door of being from or like knowing myself as an extrovert person, like that side of me kind of came out, and then right now working as a user experience designer for a digital platform that is also around healthcare and just well-being.
Nice. So I'm curious to dig more into your childhood and kind of this switch that happened when you started to understand sort of the broader picture of the world. When you were growing up as a kid, as best you can remember, what was the perspective on things like the government and compulsory hijab laws and all of these sorts of things? And also, if you don't mind me asking, kind of when was this? Is this kind of in the 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, so I was born 1987, and I think around the age of when I started going to school, I think I was kind of exposed to the idea of the things that are happening at home, within the family, within our friends and relatives, are going to be so different from what is allowed publicly. Back then, I remember like talking about certain things about like my uncles in the family had a history of political background, and just they were very engaged. Even their field of work wasn't anything related to, politics, but they were very engaged. But back then, it was even talking about and acknowledging that I had like uncles that were engaged in political matters was a big deal. I'm pretty sure it's not the same right now, but from the early age, I think that was a very kind of weird concept to understand as a kid, because your parents want to teach you honesty, want
What was a weird concept as a kid?
that things outside of the home are going to be so different from what is happening in the at home with your family, like the things that we talk about versus the things that the TV shows you see in the bus, in the metro. So it kind of made me feel, and a lot of other people, kind of misplaced in their own country. um, and as a kid, I feel like that was a very complicated concept to really digest and understand. But one thing that I feel like helped us to not go crazy was the fact that it was a lot of us going through that. So we kind of had this shared experience to be able, in different phases of life, middle school is different from high school, but there was always like conversations with friends and people that were um their mindset or their ideology was like closer to you, so we could like acknowledge that, yeah, this is like happening to us. And yeah, because we didn't really know what is happening outside of Iran, we kind of thought that it's everywhere. It's like all the other countries also living two very different lives. Um, but yeah, like getting older, I think for me personally, the most paradox was, hey, I want to be an authentic, honest person, but at the same time, I had to learn how to do that by some good skills to lie at the same time. So yeah, that kind of I think a concept that when I came here, I maybe started like relaxing a little bit more and kind of like be able to make the outside and inside more similar, because I didn't have to make that adaptation anymore.
So you talk about these two spaces. There's the public space under tremendously strict law, and then there's the private space where people are living their lives. And your feeling was this was a very common idea that a lot of people felt tremendous angst over this split life. So the sense I have over the last several years, just from what I see coming out of Iran, is tons of people in that country do not like the government and the laws that are put in place there. Was your experience, whether that was again as a kid into your early 20s or even from talking to people still now, similar to that? Like, it's most people you're talking to are like, we do not want to live our lives the same way as the way the government is telling us to do.
Yeah, that's very also aligned with how I experience and what I experienced. And it's interesting that it was changing and evolving throughout the time as well. So maybe like earlier or before things, because it kind of feel like certain things actually got even worse. Like when we are talking about morality police, that roller coaster has
And
never
for
had.
people who don't know, what are the morality police?
So these are policies that especially focused on how women appear in public places, and there are certain protocols, such as not showing your hair, a specific length of your outfit, like not showing your legs, your arms, and these police officers usually their stations are around like public places like cinemas, metros, and they police your morality basically.
And you talked about how this has changed. It's gotten worse even from when you were there.
Yeah, so it got worse, it got better. So that's, I think, also another mind game for a lot of like Iranian women, that like a stress and tension of things were not really like consistent. So we had like a president that was like a little bit more liberal and was like giving us a tiny bit of more freedom. And when we are talking about these changes, it's still the foundation is like pretty messed up. It's still like we are talking about not having those basic rules, but it was like enough to stimulate us, enough to think that things are going to get better or got worse. So it was just like all the time, this tension growing up as a woman. So yeah, I did see that misplacement, disagreement, unsatisfaction about the government. But a lot of time it was a lot of people that who were, they believed in a liberal government, and that's why they were standing against like the kind of government in Iran. But I think throughout the time, the government started losing its function. Like even as a dictatorship, you still see dictatorships that are functional. They still put the needs of their citizens, the economy of the country as the first priority. But at some point, I feel like that this was even not the concern of the government and people in power. And that's like where right now I feel like people are devastated.
Yeah, it's the thing about Iran that I find, again, as an outsider, where I've spoken to some people from Iran, is there seems to be just an absolute chasm between the policy of the government and what the vast majority of people in the country seem to actually want, which is very different from a lot of other countries where you might have authoritarian rulers who are kind of taking some policy, and there's still a good number of people in that country who do actually support what that government is doing. But Iran, it seems to be that there's a huge gap between those two things, to the point where I almost, and other commentators have talked about, there's the government and then there are the Iranian people,
Yes.
and those are almost two separate things at this point.
Yeah, that's an interesting actually observation. Uh, and I think that because this funnel of who is getting the advantage, the basic needs of what group of people in Iran are being met right now. And I feel like this funnel is like getting narrower and narrower and narrower. Even I feel like within the body of the government, they are shedding. Even like there are people that was going to work in the body of the government, um, are finding it like really hard to work with, the supreme leader, which is like the core of the this power system. And yeah, so not like people far gone are not the main concern of this government to be served or to be like even considered. But yeah, we are seeing that this is even happening within the body of the government as well.
Do you still, I don't know how much of your sort of family and friends live in the US versus live in Iran at the moment, but for the people that do still live in Iran, have you like what kind of sense do you get from talking to them? Obviously, you're going to have daily conversations about just you as people and how's your week going. But when topics come up about, what's the vibe on the ground? What's the sense on the ground of how we're feeling as people compared to like what the government's doing?
Yeah, it's kind of like tragic. I see two maybe major ways that people that I am in touch with coping with this situation. We have people who are using that radical avoiding tools and live their lives like my parents. I mean, they still show up, they talk to me, they seem calm and happy. I mean, yes, they talk about bad news, but I think it's their generation. They kind of like, I don't know, they found a better way to accept and deal with the changes and all the things that are kind of a spiral for the younger generations. But then I have friends who are still in Iran, younger generations, and that's just, I don't know how they are doing it, to be honest. Because I feel like a lot of them, they're very dedicated, hardworking people with plans, but the thing is that planning in Iran doesn't work because of like you try to save money. Like you put it, you cannot set a goal for that because things change on you so frequently, so randomly, that it just makes you, I think it's like a recipe for depression and like you will run out of all of your tools to radically avoid what is happening to you. So it's just like you see a lot of people. Like when I was still in Iran, there were like a good amount, percentage of people in a social settings that didn't want to leave Iran. They were like thinking, yeah, we know that this country and this and that is not perfect, but we still want to stay and live here. They had this like feeling of belonging to the country. But I feel like that's that's gone. That feeling of belonging to the country and to the status that it is right now, it's gone, and it's sad because that's a huge thing to just eliminate from your identity. And a lot of these, I feel like the side effects, the things that will happen to your mental health, and just like understanding and realizing happens later in your life. Like for me personally, a lot of these are happening like in maybe most recent years. I always joke about this, but it is kind of like weirdly connected. I became a US citizen not long time ago. So maybe like,
What examples could you give of sort of this idea of giving up on the sense of your homeland and your culture and how that's psychologically affecting you? Like, what do you have some examples, even just like for you personally?
yeah, so the analogy that it is kind of dark analogy, but the analogy that I kind of feel makes sense to me when I think about it is that imagine that as a kid you're raised with a father figure or a mom figure, like in a family, that, like that family system was for a kid is like the only place that you feel safe and you feel that you can trust. But then you're being abused as a kid, but you really don't have the knowledge, the language of like calling what is happening to you when you're growing up. But then when you're an adult, you start reading, you start like seeing the other worlds, other families. You kind of like start feeling that, oh my God, I felt like the most unsafe, unwanted, not belonged in my own country, in my own home. So what happened to me and what should I do? So it's so hard. Most people cannot regenerate that when they're moving away. Let's say even at the age of 18. I moved at 21. A lot of us that left the country, we were like shaped for the most part. So you kind of like, yeah, you have a lot of anger, you have a lot of rage about what you experienced and how you were raised in your own country. You know they don't want you. They're happy that you left. But then the immigration policies also gets is getting harder and harder in the US, Canada, Europe. They all have their own rules. But you're not super wanted here either. But at least here, you know that if you work really hard, like something, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But even that's not, I think, good enough for just feeling better about all of this, not feeling belonged, and then regenerating the sense of home.
Right. I actually, so you're talking about the US as well. I want to talk about how, see, what you felt like when you were in the US and you were talking to people in daily life. And if I'm correct, you're in the greater Chicago area, correct? That's
Yes.
where you stay. Okay. So, and I only ask that because, so I'm in Los Angeles where there's a very large Persian community, very large Armenian community as well. And from conversations I've had, I've found most Persian and Armenian people in LA feel like they don't seem kind of out of place. That they're a demographic in the city. There are a lot of different people from around, and it doesn't seem like there's as much of an issue fitting in. What was your experience like when you came to the United States and once you got settled in Chicago? And once you told people like, "Oh, I'm from Iran. This is kind of my background." How did kind of people react to that?
I think when I moved to here, my expectations were pretty low. And I didn't actually had a sense of how it feels like to feel belonged or seem like a good fit. So I came very kind of disoriented, I would say even. Until so, the good way, I think one positive thing or one advantage of moving under student visa is that you see a lot of non-Americans, locals as well. So you kind of like start talking with them, you feel certain things in common. So I found a lot of like my social interactions and spending time with other international students. So that helped me a lot. And also another interesting concept that also I realized during grad school was how much like even Americans feel different, like East Coast versus West Coast culture. And I was like, there was this kid I remember, he was also from California and he started school in Savannah College of Art and Design. And he was just also experiencing the same level of homesickness, not feeling belonged, like so shy. And I was like, I feel like I like relate to him a lot. Like we are both very quiet, don't feel confident to talk and speak up. So I just like started observing maybe a lot. And it's a very different, again, this is like based on the stories that I've heard from my other Iranian friends. It is a little bit different experience for women from Middle East or women from Iran versus men from Iran. Um, I don't have like an exact like experience to like show this, but there was a kind of like looking us as heroes who, you know, survived life and came by like a lot of people were like amazed that I did this move by myself. I didn't have anyone in the US when I moved. So I think that window of opportunity for me that, oh, I impressed these people, um, helped me personally to be able to open up a little bit. But I don't know, some people don't find that an opportunity. They actually feel weird that they are being like looked that way. Like I had a like nice life in Iran, and sometimes it was a little bit too much. The way that they were thinking that, oh, like I'm probably coming from like a trauma center, or now it's like my life was before moving to the United States was you know, I had to like explain, oh, actually I did have a lot of good time. I missed certain things. Having fun with friends was so much cheaper. Like I was like explaining to them that I miss actually the adrenaline of having alcohol in the car and like being scared to death that we might actually like end up in a jail. But here everything is like accessible. I miss that adrenaline. Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. That's fascinating. Like I would have never thought you would say something like that. But that's I think about the movie Persepolis. The Persepolis, the black and
Yeah.
white film, right? And there's sort of They have the same thing where they're in the car and they're like, oh, if we take our hijabs off and we just stand up and we let our hair flow in the breeze, there's a sense of getting a rush from doing that because the stakes are so high.
Yeah, and I think like around that age that I was in Iran, I was like other kids in other countries. Like you thrive and you want to do things that are crazy and are exciting and kind of like not allowed. There is a pleasure in breaking the law, and we had that. It was just here, it's like doing drugs, but there it was not wearing a scarf. But it was like the same kind of pleasure, which could be very costly, and you had to be really smart about it because it was government, and also there were a lot of families that were conservative. My family wasn't, they were not conservative, but they were, worried family. So I had to do a lot of things and hiding things from them too. So it was like hiding from family, check, hiding from the government also. So we became like pretty good in terms of surviving in a situation that was like very suppressive.
Did actually to that point about families that are conservative versus not, one of the things that seems to be quite tricky with this topic of Iran and anti-government sentiment is it's very hard to get numbers on what this actually looks like. Like it's very hard. Like people really don't have a great idea about what percentage of the population actually doesn't like the government versus does like the government. But in your experience, maybe again, as a kid, it's tough to assess this stuff when you're 6, right? But maybe when you're 18, 19, was your feeling that of the different families I know, almost none of them like the government, or is it a sense of, yeah, no, there were plenty of people who were very pro hardline Islamic conservative things, and there were issues with my family and their family, or what was kind of your read of just like, the community that you were aware of and where people came down on this issue at like a family level?
hmm Yeah, I think that we had families around us that they were religious. So, and for a very long time, maybe few of them still, but I would doubt that, could find something in common with the government in power through that like religious belief. So they were believing in the narrative that the current government has behind the figure of the supreme leader. Like the story is very strong by itself, and if you're a believer, it can sell very well, in my opinion, for a person that is like a believer of that. So with these families, I feel like they were also going through a very confusing phase as well, because based on like their beliefs, their religion, they wanted to believe in this government. But because of there were certain, I would say, iconic events happen throughout the um, uh, like recent history after the revolution in Iran that hurt the image of the government for these group of people as well. So they started seeing that they were like killing young, like population, like generations on the street for, just protesting, like the violence, the how it publicized or like
Yeah, how it became public knowledge that there would
exactly
just,
like
right, there'd be a protest and like
daytime.
300 people are killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to your face, like daytime. So if even in the like in the past, before all of these iconic events, there were like rumors. There were no like actual proof. But then when the videos came out, and then the burst of social media and how the platform kind of evolved into becoming more than just, fun stuff and casual stuff became like a platform for people to raise their voices, share their experiences. So I feel like, yeah, they were families that had that connection with the government through this like common value system. But yeah, after those incidents or those iconic events, that was also damaged.
Do you want to talk about Mahsa Amini?
No, we can. No,
Totally
definitely.
your
We
call.
still
Okay.
should. Yeah, we still should talk about it. And I think, do you have like any specific question
Well, I was just
about it?
what I'd be curious about is first of all, who was she, right? Who was she? How and how did her death rate inspire kind of this movement for people who maybe don't know? Because plenty of people listening, they might know who Mahsa Amini is, but many people might also not know who that person is.
I actually like that question because I think it's a question that I want to think about after 2 years of that uprising. If you were asking me who was Mahsa Amini 2 years ago, I was probably like really stimulated by like what the news wants her to be. Um, but what I truly think was Mahsa Amini was again that w one bold, unrealistic like needle that burst a lot of like again newer wave of population in Iran about the true color of this government. Uh, I think Mahsa Amini and the Ukrainian airplane that I don't know if you're familiar with that
No, what
incident.
was the Ukrainian airplane?
So that happened. I need to check the dates to be precise, but 2 years before that, so the Iranian regime, by mistake, they actually shoot a missile to a passenger plane from the Ukrainian airplane, and there were like a lot of just Iranian students, citizens in that plane, and then for a very long time they denied it. And then finally they kind of like they actually saw that they couldn't like hide the truth. So they actually went public and yeah, I never really actually acknowledge or even apologize properly. Nothing. It was just still very tragic, very painful. So I think, yeah, the Mahsa Amini and how things, how what the main thing that happened, and then the media coverage and how much it got, just enough space to become public worldwide, I think was a very unique thing that happened in Iran after the revolution. Um, and just I feel like with Mahsa Amini and with the Ukrainian plane incidents, I see one thing in common in both of these events, that the people that actually got hurt was very similar to us. So we could like feel that this could be me. Like about Mahsa Amini, every single time whatever that I was like hearing from like more details, and not only her, uh, after that, all the victims of the uprisings, i- with every single person, we could relate. It was from our generation, it was people with the same hopes, goals, even values. So it was like feeling like we are missing it, like losing a sister or a close friend. So yeah, this is like the emotional impact of Mahsa Amini on me personally, because when I left Iran, one of the reasons that I was actually very determined to not live in Iran was because I didn't want to choose the path of being a social activist or a political activist. But I cared, like I couldn't not care. So I was like, I cannot be in this in between world of I'm not an activist, not actually doing anything, but at the same time, this is like taking a lot of toll out of my day-to-day life. So I left the country. I was not like following any news, barely was like could even like sit in a political or social conversations that my parents were having until the Mahsa Amini, because then I was like, this is not political. This is just I cannot just be silent. And I did my part as much as I could.
And just to recap for people who didn't know, what happened with Maz? Like, what happened to her? Why did she become this symbol? Like,
So yeah, that morality police that we were talking about it. So she's visiting visiting Tehran from her hometown. And this morality police, they arrest her. They think that she's not wearing her hijab properly. And under custody, apparently there's some physical uh, engagement happens between the officials and her, and she's being pushed based on some of the footages that came out. She's being pushed and get a concussion, and that concussion leads to some serious damage that she loses like her conscious for I think like few days, and then she passes away. And this whole thing was kind of captured and was on the news. And yeah, people were just waiting to see what is gonna happen. No one could believe that she has actually died under the custody of the police in Iran.
To this point, as since you were in the US when all of this was happening, and more just we'll say broadly when you were in the US, how did you feel amongst maybe not the either international students or Americans or all of them, how people perceived you as someone from Iran? You said there was a sense of like, oh, women from Iran are seen as heroes or whatnot. Did you find people were generally pretty educated about that, or at least that sentiment, or were a lot of people not very knowledgeable, or they view it as like, oh, Iran, we don't like that country, that's a bad country? Or was it sort of a range of like different people had different views on things?
So, if I want to zoom out a little bit about the perception of the world, especially because, as I mentioned, I traveled a lot when I was a kid and throughout like different stages of my own life. Like as a high school girl, going and visiting the Western cultures, and then I moved to the United States. So I think there was like interesting change in terms of what people think about Iran. So the first time that I was like talking around the age of 18 to like people from England or other countries, they couldn't even differentiate Iran from Iraq. So I had to like actually pronounce that, oh, this is with N, not like Iraq, and then explain that we speak Persian. And then, you know, I personally don't get offended because there are like so many countries that I even don't know about them, and I feel like considering that I have traveled a lot, I should know, but I don't. But yeah, I always like tell them that yeah, if I see a person from Saudi Arabia, we need to speak English with each other. I can read their language, but we cannot talk. This the same language. So that was like one phase that people didn't know about Iran even. And then we had the first crazy president, Ahmadinejad,
Ahmadinejad,
and
yep, I remember him.
yeah.
Yep.
So he kind of like made us famous, but not in a way that you would enjoy. But a lot of people started actually knowing Iran. And yeah, that image was kind of like hard to hear, engage with, not feel offended because they were directly associating whatever that he was saying in these like all official big platforms to you, and they were like nonsense. And then I feel like there was a period of time that not many people were talking about Iran, but somehow the culture of Iran, and I think artists, filmmakers played a big role. There were a like big wave of Iranian actresses, especially actors like a female artist moved out of Iran and started creating work that was presented in like public settings, and they were not in a political environment. They were in cultural and art scenes and platforms. And I think it was like that around that point when you were talking about Iran, everybody was like, oh yeah, Persian kebab or the stews, food, rug, even cat. So you started like hearing things that were a little bit less intense, and you could like have an easier conversation. And then after Mahsa Amini, I think all of that journey of like Iran becoming a more known country in the world um, also shifted, and maybe this time again more dominant towards the women, and just acknowledging that how much the women in Iran are powerful despite of the all the budget, and how much the focus of the government, first of all, is to suppress women. like their energy. Like they have a police for them. Like half of the country are women, and they're like this is scared of the women of their own country, so they have police for them. And then wow, they're like coming out, they're so brave, they're still not wearing hijab despite all of that. And then they started like hearing about the consequences of not wearing and covering your hijab, and still people doing that. So that bravery of women in Iran, I think specifically was the byproduct and the result of Mahsa Amini
Yeah.
uprising.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm thinking about from my perspective of tracking what I knew about Iran as a country, and that tracks pretty much with what you're kind of saying. That kind of I sort of became aware of it in terms of daily political life, probably with Ahmadinejad in, because I would have been in high school, sort of like 15, 16, where you're just beginning to kind of learn about the world and like what's happening politically and stuff. And so there was a sense of, okay, yeah, it's kind of this from the US perspective, like this enemy nation, we really don't like them. The war hawks in the US are kind of, oh, should we do any kind of military action against them? And then through the culture and through I think the internet basically getting a much better perspective of a how bad the government really is, how many people in the country don't agree with what the government wants, and how there's a very strong cultural tradition in the country, which I do want to talk about in a second. You mentioned film, and film is a big one too. Um, and the growing feeling, and I think about even now with a lot of this is both in the US, Canada, Western countries, how if you see a lot of the protests that have to do with Israel and Gaza, which we can table that for this discussion, I notice a lot of the and what I'm going to call like the lion and sun flag, like the old Persian lion and sun flag, at a lot of these protests on usually like the pro-Western side, which is a very interesting point to this same idea of a lot of the people themselves are very, very different from the regime running the country. And that to me is now like, that's just how I go into most conversations with someone from Iran about like, I just assume you guys are, I almost view it as like people in North Korea or something, where it's like the people are basically being held hostage by the regime that runs the country. Which again, I wouldn't have thought about that 20 years ago, but that's basically the way I see it now.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. But yeah, the only thing is that when you were actually talking about your experience made me think of yeah, but not many people are interested in culture and art. So we're still like targeting a little like less percentage of the people in the world, people in America. So if we get lucky, if we have like a you like American who is interested in art and culture, yeah, you have a pretty good chance of having a conversation with them and feel really good about that, how educated they are. But on the other hand, when you have like political um, dumb people in power, that just because it is taking more place on a daily news, and we don't have the same like genius minds or creative minds in art and culture in our politicians. Like as much as we have a lot of like growth and everyday thriving, it's exactly the opposite happening in terms of political intelligence. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but I don't know, like, what is the way? Like, we really need a big change for being able to broadcast even more that what people of Iran want.
Yeah, speaking of famous Iranian female activists, I became aware of Mahsa Amini about maybe a year and a half ago, year something like
Hmm.
that. I didn't really know who she was until she was on a Sam Harris podcast, actually, talking
Hmm.
about very much this topic of gender apartheid in Iran and how awful it is and all of these things. And subsequently, I've become very inspired by her work. And I don't want to sound sort of like, as you said, I talk to these Westerners and they are just like, oh, you're a woman from Iran, you're a hero just for existing. Like, I don't want to just be another one of those people, but I'm certainly on that team. I think compared to the other side. But yeah, I think it's more important, and it's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you about just getting the word out to more people about the actual state of affairs. Because I don't think enough people know.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I feel like platforms like this, and that can be have like louder voice in terms of, okay, there are a lot of people who are using social media, billboards, museums, art exhibitions to talk about like what is happening, you know, and everybody has like their own unique perspective, and some of them like I go as a Persian, as an Iranian. I know one of your questions was Iranian
Yeah, I
versus
want to
Persian.
ask about that actually, Persian versus Iranian. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't feel maybe as much like connected to the perspective of that person because they're probably like pointing out to the phase or um, area of the Iran. As I mentioned, it was like very dynamic and was like changing towards like more radical, more liberal. But overall, I feel like, yeah, just like platforms like social media that the same the good thing about social media is kind of uh, fisting or shoulder to shoulder in terms of power and impact on people as much as like TV and news and newspaper and political news in general um, right now have on the public education. So yeah, just like people who are using these medias, these platforms, just keep doing this because that's the place that I feel like right now will get the more attention and view.
Yeah. Let's talk about Persian versus Iranian. So I can tell you what I know.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's a
I
weird
wanna know your
analogy I'm going to use
experience.
actually. So my family they're from the UK, and the analogy I use for Persian to Iranian is like English to British, where the Persians are it's like an ethnic group. They are not everyone in Iran. They're the biggest ethnic group, and they're the ones who have kind of steered the ship, right? But the whole country of Iran includes other ethnic groups of people that are not just Persians, right? So, like, I would see it as all Persians are Iranian, but not all Iranians are Persian. How close am I on that?
Yeah, no, you're pretty close. And to be honest, I also learned about that pretty recently. And that was like between German and Deutsch. That I was like, oh, okay, I see. So this is, we are not the only like country that is like dealing with this confusion. I think that's technically correct. But in terms of like emotional um,
Yeah, tell
kind
me
of
about
take
that.
on that. I personally like really don't care about that as much as a lot of people that like all the time make sure that to refer to Iran only with Persian. I started using it more often because people know Persian a lot easier apparently, which was like interesting for me. That if I want to speak to or talk to someone in a subway, and especially if I see that that person is maybe like few generations older than me. Like I tested that actually to see, I was just like was curious to see like if I say Iranian, how like what look that I get versus Persian. And with Persian, I don't know, they were a little bit more on the same page than Iranian. And it was like just a more pleasant experience. So I started using Persian, but I always like follow it by I am from Iran. Um, yeah.
That's so interesting you say that because I think of I'm acknowledging this is a complete stereotype that I have, but it's kind of in my head, which when I hear Persian, I think much more it has sort of like a sexy arts and culture and long history of kind of noble things. Iranian is associated with, a bunch of Iranian terrorists took over a
Yeah.
plane or whatever,
Yep,
and
that's
it's
true.
just like negative hardline Islamic people that want to kill us. And those are, and again, I'm saying I'm fully aware those are stereotypes, but it's the association of those two words, I think. I think like Persian literature and poetry and food and all of these things. And I think the hardline Iranian regime that is currently oppressing women. And it's like, and those two things those are the concepts I associate with those two words, even though, yes, like Iran does just include people of other cultures that are not Persian who just live within the borders as well.
Hmm. No, that's very interesting. And I also realized that even if I use Iran in a sentence, I would say like this is from Iran. I still try to not use Iranian because of that very bold association between mullahs. But I feel like with Persian, we still like kept it mullah free, and yeah, detached from. It is detached from the current state and attached to this like image that I personally only read about it in the books, but it's yeah, it's very sexy. It's full of life and liberalism. Um, just yeah, it's like very progressive.
I do want to talk about that, because we said there's so much of this, terrible stuff with the government, and it's all doom and gloom. But I'd also love to talk about Persian culture and the value of Persian culture and the things that I, as an outsider, kind of really appreciate it, really like about it, but also kind of get your take on like what are the things that I think are valuable, in terms of Persian culture.
So yeah, maybe like let me share a little bit of again personal experience about our culture as an immigrant. So for a very long time, I personally couldn't do this. I mean, I now appreciate so much a lot of Iranians who were able to still keep their traditions, keep their like spices, the food that they eat. The carpet, the decoration of their places. You go in the US and it's like all decorated with Persian stuff. And I couldn't do it because for me, that was just like so much trigger of like homesickness and just like missing home a lot. And I really couldn't like satisfy myself of creating a mini Persian culture in a like country that it's so Western, so different. And especially right now that I'm not like fully comfortable to go and travel back to Iran. So I really didn't want to experience that kind of in between world. But it was like maybe the citizenship of I don't know what happened after that, but for me it was a personal experience that I started like gradually opening myself to being a Persian. Actually, how does that look like to be a Persian in the US? Maybe before that, I wasn't American for sure because yeah, more than half of my life was in Iran. I was busy like finding the things in common and then the things that were not in common. Like I was like playing a little game maybe in my own head to kind of try to understand my identity as a when I was like 22, moved to Savannah, Georgia, and then lived in New York, Chicago, all of these like major cities. And maybe more recently, I am like at a place in my life that I was able to actually let my Persian side, culture, history to come out. And what I'm like realizing is that how feminine it is actually, which is very ironic. And it explains so much again. Like for me, was kind of like connecting these dots that how brave our women are in Iran, just in general. Compare, I don't know, I don't want to even compare, but just like compared to the men in Iran. And now that I have this like more experience with Persian culture, Persian food, like the spices that we use, the literature, everything is just like so feminine. And then at the same time, we are under this government who doesn't want to acknowledge us and wants to find every possible way to eliminate that femininity, like being able to express yourself as a female and feel safe. So that for me was also something as a woman in the US. I very lately started to be able to be a woman and express the way femininity uh, the kind of femininity that I want to express, especially like having this public social media. I was like, yeah, I feel like I've never actually expressed myself as a Persian, and then on top of that, as a Persian woman. So both of these for me had to unpack after making sure that, sometime like living in here, accepting that. where is my place here? And I'm kind of like regenerating my home, like calling Chicago home. And I don't know if that's true about all Iranians, but for me, traveling more than anything used to feel like home. Still feels like home more than anything else. So for a lot of people, a certain smell or a place or a kind of bread. But for me, when I was traveling, was feeling like home because it was reminding me that it is okay that I really actually don't belong to Iran, my hometown. Like the government really actually doesn't like the kind of person I am. Um, and then here in the US, again, I wasn't born here, so everything is like fairly new for me. So yeah, when I was like traveling, I was able to actually connect to maybe my Persian culture more than when I was like actually stationary and settling.
Are there certain aspects, we don't need to pick and choose because obviously culture is made up of a lot of different things, but certain aspects of the culture you feel the most in touch with? Um, it again could be the food or poetry or music, sort of music, film, the language, speaking Farsi, those sorts of, or just like certain cultural dynamics, social dynamics. Anything that you feel most attached to and that you feel is like the most special to you. And then are there things that you feel you're maybe a little bit more distant towards?
Mhm. Um, I think flavor and texture are the two things that I feel like in Persian food and Persian music, these two places I can connect the most. The reason of that is because these two qualities are not using words. They're like directly attached to your personal subjective experience and they're very potent. So I don't know if you have ever had Persian food, but I think
Absolutely.
maybe.
So I live in West. I live basically just south of Westwood, which is near UCLA, and that's called Little Tehran, or sometimes called Tehrangeles. So I've actually my first introduction to Persian food was actually when I was 18 when I moved because I'm from New York originally and I moved to LA, and so that was the first time I had encountered Persian food as well as Korean food, which again for LA those are two very large demographics. And I love Persian food. I thought it was delicious. There's a saffron and rose Persian ice cream place. I didn't know what Persian
Yeah.
ice cream was. Then I had saffron and rose. I was like, oh, I love Persian ice cream. This is great too. So yes, I have eaten Persian food. I quite enjoy it, and I knew nothing about it until I was 18, 19 years old.
Yeah, and then experience of eating it and then experience of cooking it also in my opinion unpacks another level of how beautifully this many complex ingredients are sitting this beautifully and united. And it like makes me think of how like beautifully our art and creativity can mix infuse things this beautifully to work really nicely, but then like we have a stupid government. Yeah, it's it's weird. Like I'm cooking Persian food, like the smell, the taste, everything, and I'm like still think about like how stupid our government is. But I think because yeah, these flavor and texture are not using words. And in music, again, same thing. Unfortunately I don't play any music, but I think if I would have, it would have been same to like similar to cooking experience. I feel like there's a lot of like again bringing in different things and making something really beautiful out of it. So that's like where I personally relate a lot. And maybe you also asked less related. I think where the words become like the main medium um, of talking about the culture in Iran, because then again, it's hit or miss. I might relate because it is speaking about something that I also experienced, and especially maybe part of the experience that I had, I went to art school in high school, which is a very kind of rare or it, especially in the US, because most people that came to the US, they were in math or science majors, but I actually came from a very artistic background, even from high school. So back to our earlier points that I we talked about two world of family and then public. I feel like because of going to art school and art university, I had a middle ground between that very irrelevant public setting and then very private family setting. The artists and more intellectual people that whom I was like classmates with, I was like spending my time in the University of Tehran, the art department. Um, why I was talking about this? Um, Oh, so the experience the experience that I had, sometimes when I like read like even like the Marjan Satrapi's book and a lot of movies that are talking about very like dark times in Iran, I acknowledge that and they are valid, and there are so many people who also have experienced the same kind of narrative, but for me personally might not really hit the same spot that flavor and texture do in our food and music.
Mm. And when you talk about music, are you referring to, because I have some exposure to traditional Persian music, like about, things that people would have been writing prior to the mid 20th century. That I've listened to a bit of that. I quite love it. I think it's a very it's a very lovely genre of music. Are you referring to that style of music, or also more, I could imagine, contemporary music that probably would have been written between about the 50s up to about 1979? I'm just curious to hear more about, like, when you talk about music from Iran, like what does that consist of? Like
Yeah,
what
no, that's a good
styles are we talking
question.
about?
I'm talking about the classic traditional music, which is like using the Persian instruments. Most of the lyrics is from the poets of Hafiz or Sadi. Yeah, those are like that. That's the music that I'm talking about. The contemporary music in Iran, for me, I think falls under that using words as a tool to express. And again, some of them usually it's like less room for subjective interpretation because words are there and you kind of like listen to those versus like I personally enjoyed that again, texture and flavor.
Yeah. Well, that's great because I think more people should actually listen to traditional music from a lot of different cultures around the world, and it's a very, very uh, diverse tapestry of musical sounds that I think don't get enough airtime compared to an increasingly what I feel is sort of standardized top 40s, like international pop, that a lot of it just sounds kind of. I'm not saying I hate it all. Like some of the songs like are fine, they're catchy, but it's that's a culture, sort of global cultural thing that's just like become a little sticking point for me actually. And I think Iran, its traditional music is great in that regards.
Yeah, no, that's true. The only thing about that type kind of traditional classic Persian music that sometimes I feel is again lack of or the absence of female vocals. It's again a very masculine. And I personally like need to sometimes break it with a more recent. They're still considered as older musics like Haide or Mahasti or even Gugush, because for me, I'm kind of like, okay, I need some female voice because it's like very masculine dominated.
There's a channel. They took one of the videos down, which is too bad. It was called the Traditional Music Channel, and they had a bunch of really good videos. And that's actually how I got introduced to traditional Persian music. And at least from a number of the songs they had selected, there were a lot of female vocalists actually on the
Hmm.
tracks. Again, I need to go and find out which exact video that is, and if I can find it, we're going to put the link in down below. But that was, I don't know if it was 50-50 or whatever, but there was plenty of female vocals, and there
Hmm.
were great tracks. So I
Yeah,
can
no,
look that out
definitely
and
there are
try to
more.
send it your way
Yeah,
if you're interested.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, I was just wondering if you have any other kind of last points, topics, whether it's on the value of Persian culture, the difference between the Iranian people and the government, your personal experiences that you'd like to share before we wrap up.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I think maybe to the viewers of this video, I think a lot of us as Iranians might feel that um, our stories or our experiences are not really understandable for other cultures. And I feel like just get taking those opportunities as a person in like public settings, social engagements to go forward and start talking, and even like about daily stuff. It doesn't need to be like our culture or our history, but just like even about daily stuff. The journey that all of us as Iranians who left the country have gave us a very unique perspective and presence as a human. And I feel like sometimes we forget and we lose that confidence and we just don't feel that we can be heard and understood. And I think if we go forward and start speaking, we find that a lot of that unique perspective is carried over to our day-to-day like living and our opinions and perspectives. And I think that would help to just educate Westerners, people from other countries about Iranians. And again, because the media has the most power and they're very loud to show the things that are not really representing us. But we have social media, we have other platforms, and we have like social settings. So, just yeah, just as from a personal perspective, whenever I chose to go and speak up and talk to people and share my opinion, generally people were open to hear something different, and there were most of the time interesting conversations came out of those interactions.
Nice. And where can we find you if you want to plug any social media handles, etc., etc.?
Yeah,
If you don't
so
want to, no
I
worries.
yeah, no, no, actually I do have a page that I really enjoy the connections and relationships that I build with the community there. It's called Saba Notbat. And it is kind of like talking about anything. So yeah, fitness is like a um kind of major passion of my life. So I do talk about that, but also a lot of conversations, very casual. It's a very safe place, which I feel so fortunate to be able to have a public open page with people who, the dynamic is kind of not necessarily balanced between how much I know about them versus they know about me. But it has always felt so far very safe. So yeah, I post stuff there.
Cool. Well, we will put all the links down below. Sabanyaki, thank you so much for coming on, and for everyone who made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Don't go ahead, don't leave unless you have, maybe like the video. It helps us out a lot, as well as subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much
All
again,
right.
Saba.
Thank you so much.